The Assassination of Jesse James by the coward Robert Ford is a biopic Western drama directed by Andrew Dominik from 2007. It's based off the novel by the same name and from the real-life events of America's most famous outlaw, Jesse James. Back in 2007, a year saturated with amazing movies, we saw the resurgence of the Western, a film genre that wasn't popular, and hadn't been for a very long time due to its historical roots being in Golden Age cinema. However, that year we got Oscar giants There Will Be Blood and No Country for Old Men, both directed by well-known art house filmmakers like Paul Thomas Anderson and Joel and Ethan Coen. The Assassination of Jesse James by the coward Robert Ford was that same year. It gathered critical acclaim, positive reception from both critics and audiences, and even had an Oscar nomination for Casey Affleck's performance as Robert Ford. So why does nobody talk about this movie? Well, as stated, it came out when two more popular films from popular directors emerged, in the same stagnant genre. Andrew Dominik, the director, had only made one film at the time and wasn't very well known. However, along with the genre, it held another point of similarity, seeing as it was shot by famed cinematographer Roger Deakins. It had a cast of actors debatably more well known than its contemporaries, like Brad Pitt, Casey Affleck, Jeremy Renner, Sam Rockwell, and a few other famous faces. But it only made half of its budget. But why? Perhaps it's the irony that got the best of the film, as it's a film about fame, glory, nostalgia, disillusionment, and several other ideas that convey a sense of loneliness. Be it the vacant expression on Brad Pitt as he plays a suave but volatile Jesse James, or the nervous yet calculated demeanor coming from Casey Affleck as Robert Ford. It is a film about lies, maturity, and about how we idealize things that we truly know nothing about. So today I will attempt to analyze the underappreciated majesty of a film that, like its main character, seemed to disappear and lose its meaning as if it almost didn't exist. The film follows predominantly the last year of the life of the American outlaw Jesse James, the members of his gang, and particularly the Ford brothers, members of the aforementioned gang. Robert is a young man of 19, and he idolizes Jesse James from reading about him in dime novels and hearing stories. Jesse is a myth to him, he's practically a god, so he attempts to help out Jesse with what is supposedly his last heist. He joins and his brother follows suit, as we see the last job and last moments of the James gang, leading to the death of Jesse himself, and the life of Robert afterwards. Part of why this film works is because it's a true story. Many people who are related to the real-life characters in the film have gone on to say that they are perfectly represented based on stories told to them by their older generations. Upon seeing the film, it's actually hard to believe that it's a true story because the narrative so easily lends itself to the ideas and themes it wants to get across. Robert Ford is a man who idolizes his vision of Jesse James, but when it turns out that he isn't the god he thought, or that he was told, he becomes so jaded and resentful, but not willing to part with the man because he so desperately wants Jesse to validate his own life. This is perfectly demonstrated in several scenes. One of the most prominent early in the film is when Jesse remarks,
"Can't figure it out. Do you want to be like me, or you want to be me?"
That one line almost encompasses the entire film. Ford is admiring the idea of Jesse but not the actual man. In a society so ingrained to idolize those who are famous or infamous, this 120-year-old story has only become more relevant. Jesse James is a man who, at the end of the day, is no legend. He is a deeply flawed and haunted man who grows paranoid because his misdeeds make him unable to trust even the closest of friends. We know his name, but we do not know the man. People have named their children after him, they've made several films about him, and they all glorify him as someone we should root for and admire. This film doesn't make us hate him or like him, it makes us understand him. He's paranoid, but he loves his children. He's violent, but gentle when it's warranted. The legend of Jesse James and Jesse James, the man, are quite undoubtedly different entities entirely. Naming the film The Assassination of Jesse James by the coward Robert Ford is an interesting choice. It's a long and laborious title, but it isn't without its purpose. First off, we know the fate of Jesse and Robert before the film even begins, making the tone of the film almost apocalyptic in how we know all of this will inevitably end. Jesse will die, Robert will kill him. We know, but the actions themselves aren't important, but the context preceding them is. Not to mention, it's unmistakable. Robert Ford is our main character, but the title sticks on Robert's name like a bandage covering a hideous wound. It even dubs him a coward just to further stigmatize him. This is because Ford's infamy did not come from the crimes and deeds he committed like Jesse, but for killing a man who everyone loved, even though they didn't even know him. Even the poster of the film shows us this idea. Jesse is front and center, Robert is casually off to the side, smaller, less important, tacked on, as if he's embarrassed to even be there. Considering the end of the film shows that Robert Ford lived a miserable and regret-filled existence after he killed Jesse, and how unceremoniously he dies, and how much Jesse is glorified, before we even see the film, the idea of misplaced infamy and false depictions is already placed in our brain. The other characters in the film are like chess pieces, well-defined, but they inevitably serve to prop up our two main leads. They are dwarfed by Jesse's screen presence and Robert Ford's nervous demeanor. The main theme in this film is that of disillusionment. Not only is it displayed by Robert's ever-changing view of his hero, but the audience fits comfortably in Ford's shoes when it comes to this. We've also heard of Jesse James in the same way that Robert has, through legend, through stories. James's name is so synonymous with cowboys, legends, westerns, and infamy. His name is used as hyperbole. And we tend to forget, we don't know the man we refer to when we refer to him. The audience, just like Bob, slowly learns that this man is simply just a human being. However, while the focus of the film stays with Bob and Jesse, the film's final half an hour is dedicated to Bob, as if the film is apologizing to him. It makes us see what he felt like, how he spent his last days. As Jesse was even further immortalized, Robert became the most hated man in America. He was shot by a man who had never even met Jesse, and that same man was pardoned by the governor simply because Bob wasn't deemed worthy enough to have his killer brought to justice. Bob wanted to be a legend like Jesse, but only ended up making himself viewed as less than human by the American public. Something that is, for me at least, difficult to watch due to its Shakespearean level of tragedy. Bob at first attempts to hide his sins by putting on a play of how Jesse was shot, thinking that people would be wowed by his tale of bravery. He shot Jesse not because he was a coward, but because he was in fear for his own life and the life of his brother. Not to mention, I think it's questionable as to whether or not Jesse let Robert shoot him. Perhaps death was just Jesse's next adventure. The whole sequence in the film works because it packs a punch. Robert aims a gun at Jesse as he fixes a picture, and the score builds this melancholy, dreary song that makes emotions swell. But as soon as the gun goes off, the music stops, as if to say, this isn't drama, this isn't exaggerated, this was real. There was no music or melancholy when Jesse died. There was only a gunshot, a dead man, a family without a father, and a man who killed someone because he was terrified of him. It all serves to prove a point, to show us that everyone is human, but we don't always treat people like they're human. Celebrities nowadays are myths. They're heroes, legends, villains. Their fame from their actions makes us idolize them. But the people behind the legend are still people. In the end, people treated Jesse like a god, and they didn't even treat Robert like he was a man. Once you see the events of the film, you see how incredibly tragic it all is, that a flawed man is respected, and a misunderstood man is hated. The film also serves as a potent deconstruction of its very genre. Its characters are much more definitive than normal Western archetypes due to the true biopic nature of the story. No one is good or bad in terms of moral absolutism, which is a common Western trope. The aforementioned scene where Jesse is shot isn't grandiose, as is with most Westerns, a la The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. It isn't overly dramatized. It feels genuine. The drama from the film comes directly from the characters rather than the plot. It is still a Western at heart, but more of a Sophoclean Western where doom is imposed on everyone inside the film. On a technical level, the film is beyond impressive. As mentioned earlier, 2007 was a year where famed cinematographer Roger Deakins did arguably some of his best work. There Will Be Blood, No Country for Old Men, and the assassination of Jesse James by the coward Robert Ford were all shot by him. I find it incredibly appropriate, as Deakins' style of cinematography, his framing, his wide shots of vacuous landscapes that feel so empty you can feel the loneliness bleed out of the screen. It all feels perfect for this exact style of movie. He visually revitalized the genre, bringing classics to mind such as the films of Sergio Leone and Alejandro Jodorowsky. Shooting 3 beautiful films was no easy task. While I deem No Country for Old Men and There Will Be Blood as overall superior films, this film is my favorite visually. Deakins even made his own lenses for the film, and in several montages and wide shots, it gives the film the look of a dream, of a bygone era, or even a memory. His visuals immediately conjure up thoughts of Terrence Malick, and especially in the opening, which is easily one of the most beautiful film openings to ever be put on the silver screen. The imagery is burned into your mind, as I remember some scenes from this film better than I remember scenes from my own life. The lighting is dim, and shows off the film in mild shades of blue and orange, as if the very setting of the film is in constant conflict with itself. It remains to be a film so beautiful it could be watched on mute, every frame a meticulous painting of Renaissance caliber. The acting in the film is almost as good as the visuals. Casey Affleck's performance as the timid but anxious Robert Ford earned him an Oscar nomination. Ironic that he plays a character who has been lost to the tides of time. Even immortalized in film, he will likely never earn the recognition he really deserved for this role. Maybe his performance hit so close to home since Casey too lives in the shadow of someone more famous. Brad Pitt as Jesse James, on the other hand, steals the show. Getting a larger-than-life personality to play another larger-than-life character was a brilliant move. Pitt can go from 0 to 50 in a split second, and in order to play Jesse accurately, that was necessary, as Jesse's emotional state alters fluidly, as if he was bipolar. He can be quiet, and he can be frightening, but the best parts of his performance are when you can't tell what he's thinking at all. Pitt has an incredibly difficult task in this role, and if you ask me, this remains the highlight of his entire career. The supporting cast is also fantastic. Jeremy Renner, Sam Rockwell, Zooey Deschanel. All actors do a great job and went on to do more recognized work. The music by Nick Cave and Warren Ellis is also outstanding. The film's score is reminiscent of Aronofsky's Requiem for a Dream, but sounds more slow, more melancholy. The individual tracks seem to perfectly encapsulate the scenes of the film, as if the music is the captured essence of memory. The film's only issue, if you ask me, is its pacing. There's one subplot in the film that doesn't really add to the experience and lets the movie drag a bit in the second act. Apparently the director, Andrew Dominik, wanted to release a cut of the film where it would be more than likely shorter, but due to the film's unsuccessful run, he was unable. The Assassination of Jesse James by the coward Robert Ford is a movie that oozes quality and tragedy in equal volumes. Everything about the film is not only expertly crafted, but masterfully done. A film about a man who was lost to time. In a sad twist, seems it may have been lost among the tides as well. It's been forgotten, but those few who have seen it remember it fondly, myself included. It has stuck with me in a way that a lot of other films just haven't. The final act of the film is an emotionally draining experience for me, as I find I oddly identify with Robert's search for meaning and anxious demeanor. So in a way, this is my tribute to both the film and the man, as maybe I can rope in a few new fans of the film should you decide to watch it, which I would very much recommend that you do. In an odd, ironic twist, it seems that this film, even though it masquerades around as if it's about Jesse, is more about Bob than anyone. When I first saw the movie beforehand, I figured I would walk into it with a newfound reverence for America's most famous outlaw and a hatred for the man who ended his life. In actuality, I left it feeling sorry for Jesse, but thinking that Robert Ford was not a coward who deserved my hatred or the hatred of America, but a human being that deserved my and everyone else's respect.
Hello, Bob.
The shotgun would ignite, and Ella May would scream. But Robert Ford would only lay on the floor and look at the ceiling, the light going out of his eyes, before he could find the right words.